Going to kick off part one, though, with a man who has pretty much been called every name in the book, plus more, the last several weeks, and even prior to the death of George Floyd. And I thought it would be good to talk with him directly today. Now, some have asked, why did he and the union board wait several weeks before they spoke out? I'll let him tell you that directly. But I also want to disclose that Lieutenant Bob Kroll and his wife are friends of mine. Does that change how I would conduct this interview? Absolutely not. I happen to know some things about him because we're friends that could come up today that might be interesting for you. Bob has no idea what I'm going to ask him. Lieutenant Bob Kroll, thanks so much for joining us today.
Good afternoon, Roshini. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'd have to start with something that I found sort of funny, actually. They say that if you're spoofed on Saturday Night Live, you've sort of landed in a place of fame. And I would say locally, if you have been depicted in a SAC cartoon in the Star Tribune, that's about the same as being on SNL. Have you seen the cartoon from, I believe it was yesterday or Friday's paper from SAC?
I have. It was sent to me numerous times. Looks like I gained a lot of weight.
All right, and in that, it depicts that you are a hardliner. That's kind of what I got from that. What do you think SAC means by that cartoon? Do you have any analysis for us?
I kind of think that the analogy there is that I prohibit change within the MPD, and that could not be further from the truth. I've been on the Federation board for 24 years. I didn't just fall out of the sky and land there. I negotiated 7 contracts with the administration under 4 different mayors, and I've negotiated a park police contract. So I just didn't recently appear, and I've been always open to change and always willing to help with that process.
Okay, I think it also would help, and I'm a licensed attorney. I've been a broadcaster for about 24 years, and just the law and just the regulations and the policies, I think it would help if people understood the role of the head of the union and the role of the union, because what I've noticed is you and other members of the union, but especially you, have been blamed for Minneapolis burning down and the death of George Floyd.
Yes, I think what that is a shift in blame from lack of leadership within the city and the state, looking for a scapegoat, and the Police Federation was that easy target. People need to understand that our job is to negotiate the labor agreement in good faith, to see that the city and the administration adhere to what's contained in the labor agreement, and to protect our members' rights involving due process. And that's no different than any labor union, and particularly any public employee labor union. I was really upset to see a lot of other labor leaders jump on a bandwagon and come after me when I wanted to ensure that our contract was followed and due process was ensured. That's what we are hired to do. In fact, we have a lawful obligation to do that. We can be sued for failure to represent if we don't.
You spoke with national outlets such as Gayle King on the CBS Morning Show. You spoke with many local outlets. I watched the entire 26 minutes that Lou Raguse did with you on Carol 11. He covered a lot of ground. I want to get into some of those things just because there were some follow-up questions that I would have asked if I had been sitting there. But first and foremost, the fact that you did not come out right away after the death of George Floyd, and we saw that video on Facebook, and that looks horrific. I think anyone with a brain would say that knee on the neck was horrible. I never saw you coming out and defending Derek Chauvin. Why or why not?
Well, I think for the political leaders to come out like they did, and I mean the mayor, the governor, the attorney general, the director of the Department of Public Safety, for them to come out with such inflammatory statements immediately, it served nobody's purpose. You need to understand that people were cooped up with COVID for several months, and a storm was brewing, and that really blew the lid off. The inflammatory remarks made by political leadership incited, in my opinion, a lot of the violence that occurred in the week that followed. And I think it was irresponsible, and it was politically driven. My statement came out the following day immediately. When I say mine, the statement from our Federation board. I don't do anything in a vacuum. There's 10 of us on the board that are a part of this, that make the decisions, and we issued a very brief statement saying justice will be served. Please remain calm. This is going to be a lengthy process, an in-depth investigation. The officers are cooperating with the process, and that was it. So I did make a statement the first day. That wasn't the time to take to the airwaves, whether radio, television, newspaper. Our officers were operating in crisis mode for the week following. Our job as police officers were to try and ensure instill safety, calm riots, quell the riots, regain control of the city. And our officers were under attack, quite literally, from everything from rocks and bottles to live gunfire on several occasions. We had a lot going on. The lack of leadership from the city made it even more difficult. There's all types of factors that go into play. And going out to the media wasn't the time or place. It would have served nobody's purpose.
And I was one of the people early on that said, you have an open invitation to come on my show, and you did not. And is the reason because of this you were waiting, or was there another reason?
There was no rush for any of this. This is going to be a long process. This involves the entire criminal justice system. We've got 4 officers that are now criminal defendants. This isn't going to go away, unfortunately, anytime soon. And I thought going out to the media so soon would just throw gas on the fire. There's too much that we need to learn in this, and I think that's why the attorneys had asked for cameras in the courtroom. I think they're making an effort to educate the public because we have a very limited view. Although certainly it's enough to see that it was horrific. Nobody needs to see more with regard to former officer Chauvin than the video that we've all seen, of course.
Let's talk about those 4 officers. They're in court for a pretrial hearing on Monday. All 4 of them, each one of them has his own attorney. What are you looking for out of tomorrow's hearing? Because I understand you have still not made a decision about whether you are going to do the grievance process for the other 3 officers. That's
correct. The city has violated the policy that existed with regard to what we as a federation get to see from the onset of this incident. And just yesterday, they changed the policy without any input, which we will be going to court over. So I don't expect much to get done. I think this is just going to be an early appearance, and I don't think we'll learn, us or the public will not learn much. Obviously, they'll enter pleas, and the process will continue.
You told Gail King and others that you wanted to see the police body cameras before you made any decision about the other officers. Explain why.
Well, the video that we've all seen really doesn't show 2 of the other officers at all. So we don't know entirely what their involvement is. I know that one officer said, hey, turn him on his side. These are very junior officers. They were on the 3rd or 4th day after field training. They're new. And then later on, video surfaced on their initial encounter and dealing with Mr. Floyd. But we don't see from the one camera what's going on. They're not in view at all, and I think that's important.
All right, because that's really been the particular thing. I have heard and read different people accusing the union, accusing you in particular, of standing behind bad officers. Now they're all former officers. Chief Rondo did fire them almost immediately. Did you have an issue with that?
I would have liked to have seen the process continue in all other ones. It's very rare that they do this. And when we say due process, they take a statement from the officer, they take statements from witnesses, they have a disciplinary panel convened, they render a decision, those types of things. They did not occur, and it happened before with former officer Noor. And other than that, I don't recall that type of terminations ever happening without any investigation at all.
I'm talking with Lieutenant Bob Kroll. He is the president of the Minneapolis Police Officers Federation. Before we go to break, one quick question. On Friday, the Minneapolis City Council voted to put an amendment on the November ballot as pertains to the Minneapolis Charter. And that, what I understand of it, would be the first step toward defunding or disbanding the Minneapolis police as we know it. What were your thoughts about that?
It's unbelievable. I think since George Floyd's death, we are seeing a preview, if you will, of what's occurring if you would defund the police. The police have been completely overwhelmed. We have retirements in mass occurring. They were short to begin with. Let's not forget the chief had asked the mayor for 400 more officers over a period of 5 years, and we've got none of those. We've declined. If you want absolute lawlessness, I mean, let's talk about what's occurred here. We've got $500 million in climbing and damages. We've got 1,500 businesses that are destroyed, many that will not return. We've had 120 people shot in the last 5 weeks. We've had over 10 deaths. And if they want more of this to occur, go ahead and defund the police. And I find it ironic that 3 council members have private security costing the city more than $63,000 to date because they have private security on them, but they won't provide that basic right for the citizens that they're supposed to serve.
And I am one of those citizens of Minneapolis, and I saw the private security story that Tom Lydon at Fox 9 did, and I was pretty stunned. I mean, this is coming out of my taxpayer dollars, so I'm very confused by all of this. All right, we're going to continue the conversation. We have to take a break. Your questions, the second half of this hour, many texts are coming in. I will get to as many as I can, but when we come back, Officer Rich Walker will join us. We are talking with Lieutenant Bob Kroll in part 1 of Crisis in Minneapolis. We're back on Real Talk with Roshini. Lots of questions coming in for Lieutenant Bob Kroll. We are in our first part of a series, Crisis in Minneapolis, and I'll tell you more about parts 2 and 3 as the hour goes on. But for now, Lieutenant Bob Kroll is president of the Minneapolis Police Officers Federation. I have many more questions for him, and I know you do too. The text screen is just lighting up. But we're going to add in one of his colleagues on the Federation board. Officer Rich Walker has been an officer for 15 years. He's been on the Federation board for 5 years. He's the second black person in the history of the Union Board to serve on the board. The first was sometime in the 70s. Officer Walker, thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You have done a lot of interviews with Lieutenant Kroll, nationally, locally. I want you to tell us, as A, an officer, and B, a black man, how you are taking in all the narratives that are spinning around us.
Well, my biggest thing about the narrative is the narrative needs to change. The narrative is right now that's running nationwide and is all over the news is that police officers, let alone white police officers, are just running around and murdering men of color. It bothers me personally because I'm an African-American male, and I understand why some people feel that way because it's what's perpetuated in the news. It bothers me professionally because I rate myself very high on the ethics scale, and I believe that doesn't stand for anything that I've signed up for, or let alone of anybody I've ever known in law enforcement. And I have a long history of law enforcement experience with personal experience, not just being an officer. It goes against everything we stand for. We're out here to make sure everybody's safe, not just African Americans, not just white people, not just Asians. We're out here for everybody. And the narrative is that we're out here just hunting people down and trying to kill them. It's just so far from the truth. It's disturbing that people actually feel that way. Now, I understand when they see it on the news, and I understand that it's repeated on the news. And if you heard my interview with Miss King, Gail King, I said that narrative needs to stop. We all need to grow. We all need to work together. And that narrative that police officers are just out here to kill people is just all it does is bring up everybody's anxiety on both sides of the table where ultimately something bad may happen because everybody's so on the defensive. The police officers are not against the citizens of Minneapolis, let alone the nation.
Officer Walker, I want to read you this text that a listener sent in about half an hour ago, knowing you two would be coming on. Roshini, I love the show. I just want to say that I have 2 special needs children. I have had the Minneapolis police to my home more times than I can count. They have been wonderful. I do not know what I would do without them. But yes, they need to be changed, but we need to do it in a way that's not defunding them. So what do you have to say to that? Because the Minneapolis City Council has put this charter amendment on the ballot for November. The mayor has said that charter amendment from the City Council is nebulous. It doesn't provide any clarity. What are your thoughts for this listener, as well as the actions of the council and the mayor?
Well, to that listener, I want to say thank you for that. We know the silent majority of people who support us don't vocally do it, and I've been told by hundreds of people they don't come out and vocally speak out because they're afraid of being targeted for supporting us. That's what we stand for. We stand for to help everybody, and I hope that person continues to have a positive relationship with the police officers. As far as the mayor goes, that's probably one of the only things that I agree with him on. I think it's devastating that they want to defund us because all it's going to do is really hurt the citizens of Minneapolis who count on us. Defunding the police is not the problem. But we got to start to change and look at the whole picture. The police officers are getting blamed for every societal problem out here. Before an officer answers a call, he's expected to know the race, the gender, the sexuality, the criminal history, the mental status, all these things that are put on us. And every time something happens bad, it's always the officer's fault, and it's always the officers don't have enough training. We are trained higher than some of the most professional industries besides law enforcement in the professional jobs. We train constantly. We go through years of college. We go through 6 months at the academy plus 6 months training on the job and continuous training. New policies, new statutes, new medical saving techniques. The police officers are trained. It's time that we stop blaming police officers for every time there is an encounter that turns sour, turns fatal. Understand that sometimes police officers make mistakes, and we got to own up to those. And we do it by being honest. But we need people on the other side that need to be honest and come out and say that when it ain't the officer's fault, we need to come out and say it ain't the officer's fault. Every time something is bad, it's always the officer's fault, and it's always because they don't have enough training. Understanding demographics change. Society changes. But it's time to stop blaming police officers for societal, cultural problems that shift and change. We adapt to the community we serve, and we do it the best way we can. And sometimes we don't get it right. Very few times we don't get it right. In Minneapolis, we average over 500,000 contacts with the citizens of Minneapolis. And throughout the year, you may have negatively hear from about 10. So if you're looking at a percentage rate, we are very efficient at what we do. And I think by defunding the police department is going to cause severe problems for the people who live in the city, and it's not right.
All right, here's a text. How about this for an experiment? Have the entire Minneapolis police force go on furlough for 2 weeks. If the city council is okay with the results, they can put the defunding to a vote. Yeah, I personally don't want that happening, as I am a resident of Minneapolis. Really quickly, Lieutenant Kroll, because we have to go to break, and then so many more questions for the two of you. There has been talk of some officers retiring early, leaving the department.
From the Rudy Luther Toyota Traffic Center.
Oh, we got a little accidental bump in there. Okay, the question that I have for you, though, Lieutenant Kroll, how many officers are on medical leave due to trauma right now?
I don't have an exact figure. I have talked with an attorney that deals with a lot of them, and he's told me upwards of 60. But that would be something, Roshini, to get how many are actually out. It would have to come from the city on who's calling sick and taking it out. They relate that 3rd Precinct takeover to Benghazi. Officers were left to die in there intentionally by our leadership.